violence, competition, and some of the antidotes to that. Peacemaking, empathy, reconciliation, forgiveness, all of that. And we will be going through the exact same strategy here. Starting off, what does the behavior look like? And we will see this is a domain where people will say, well, I can't quite define aggression, but I know it when I see it. Seeing this is going to be much more complicated than that. The behavior, what was going on in the brain 1 second ago, in this case making a distinction between what areas of the brain anatomy are involved in aggression or peacemaking or any of those things, cooperation, and what neurochemicals are involved, and then what environmental stimuli in the previous minutes to hours, what this morning's hormone levels were about, brain structural differences related to these behaviors emerging over decades, adolescent, childhood, fetal, genes, culture, ecosystems, evolution, all of that. And it struck me that a good way to first approach this topic, given how inflammatory it could be, and we will be discussing some realms of horrific human violence, just sort of as a warning about that. It seemed like a place to start off is to tell you about a fantasy of mine. And this is a fantasy I've been having ever since I was a kid on a regular basis. This fantasy built around, okay, so here's the fantasy. I'm part of a crack team of commandos, and we burst into his mountaintop fortress. And, okay, it's a fantasy, so I might as well go whole hog here. I single-handedly burst into his fortress up on top of the mountain. I've got my machine gun ready, and he's there. He grabs for his Luger pistol, and I knock it out of his hand. He grabs for his cyanide pellet to kill himself rather than be taken captive. I knock that out of his hand. He snarls. We grapple. I'm able to finally pin him down and get handcuffs on him and say, Adolf Hitler, I arrest you for crimes against humanity. Whoa, okay, Medal of Honor, all of that. And then the Medal of Honor aspects of the fantasy suddenly get a lot darker, because I have to then think about, what would I have done if I had had Hitler on my hands? What would I have done? And here's where it starts getting a little too raw. So I switched to an impersonal voice. What would I want done to Hitler under such circumstances? And if I would really allow myself to go there, it wouldn't be hard to come up with some things to do. Sever his spine in a way so he could never move again, but he would feel pain. Gouge out his eyes, puncture his eardrums, cut out his tongue so he can't speak, he can't move. All he can do is feel, and inject him with something cancerous that's going to grow in him, and he's going to spend all of hell with every cell in his body in agony and all of that. And that's what I would want done to Hitler. That's what I would do to Hitler if I were really being honest. And this would seem to make sense for the most evil person who has ever lived, with the most evil, stained soul of all time. Okay, amid my having this fantasy ever since I was a kid, and if I really stop and think about it, my heart will even beat faster as I do that. Amid that, there's kind of a problem. I don't believe in souls. I don't believe in evil. I don't believe in wickedness. I don't believe in punishment. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And none of these behaviors that I'm advocating make any sense for me some of the time. Because you look at this, and I'm like completely opposed to the death penalty, but at the same time there's some people I would like to see killed, and I enjoy all sorts of schlocky violent movies, but I'm for very strict gun control. And even though I haven't punched anyone since middle school, and that did not go very well, even though that I once spent an afternoon playing laser tag, and I had so much fun hiding in a corner shooting at people, but at the same time I can do all sorts of virtue signaling about cultural markers of interest and peace and stuff, and just to show, okay, I can even do this one from my childhood. I know that after you say, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield. You're supposed to do this. And then you say, down by the riverside. I even learned all of those. What do we see here? We see a very typical human picture, which is, I'm terribly confused about the place for aggression in everyday life. Like all the rest of us. We recoil from violence as some of the most scary things imaginable on this planet. But when it's the right kind of aggression, when it's the right kind of violence, we don't recoil. We love it. We leap up to watch it. We leap up, we pay good money to sit in the front row to watch this war movie in the hopes that good will triumph over evil. We get excited watching violent sports. We have this big problem as a species in that we don't hate violence. We hate the wrong kind, and when it's the right kind, it is so damn exciting, and we can barely restrain ourselves from leaping in and joining in, and we hand out money for it, and we hand out medals, and we elect people and mate with people based on their skill at being selectively violent at the right times and places, and we are very confused as to making sense of the place of violence in our lives, and the place of aggression, and the values we do or don't place, and antidotes to that. So, right off the bat, we are having a very complicated subject here because we have very, very mixed feelings versus mixed thoughts versus often very mixed actions when it comes down to violence and our attempts to control it. So, starting off with behavior, this is absolutely in the domain where we are like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. But what you start seeing right off the bat is it's more behaviorally complicated than one would think. The sort of question we started off with in the sex lecture is, right off the bat, what does aggression look like across the animal kingdom? What are we doing that's unique? What is not unique? And when I was a kid, you would watch every National Geographic special, and at some point in there, inevitably, there would be like some deep voice narrator saying, and man is the only species, that was back when human species only involved men, man is the only species that kills its members of its own species, or kills for pleasure, or kills for any, and like, yeah, that was universal, and that soon went down the drain. We are not the only species that kills. We know this already. Competitive infanticide. We know, actually we may not know yet, but if I didn't mention it, among male baboons, the leading cause of death are male baboons. Chimps can be murderous. All sorts of other species fight to the death. You will find impala, lovely impala, gracile, beautiful impala, male impalas with their horns who have gored each other to death over male-male competition. We are not the only species that kills. We are not the only species that kills in a premeditated way. Goodall, for example, was among the first to see that you can tell one morning, any given morning, if the males in this group, the male chimps, are about to go out and try to find somebody to kill. They're thinking about it. They're doing emotionally contagious things to get everybody to sign up. And what that means is you are looking at group violence. We are not the only species that is violent to other individuals in a group. A bunch of chimp males will take off and do a border patrol, as it's come to be called, and if they encounter a male from the next group over, they will attack and kill him. Cooperating doing that, what's that about? And we already know from back when, early in the course, if you are a male chimp growing up, you are going to spend your whole life in this group. It's your sisters who are going to get itchy and transfer out when they're hit puberty, and other females come in a group of chimps. All the adult males are brothers or cousins, or at least have been playing with each other their entire lives. This contrasting with baboons, where at adolescence it's the males who pick up and leave, and you look at adults in a baboon troop and the females have been there with their mothers and sisters and all that their whole lives, and the males are all guys who showed up someday from who knows where one day, and none of them are related. And that point we saw earlier, among male baboons, aggression is entirely within group, competition there. But with chimps, where all the males have grown up there, you get one of the scariest versions of males you could find on this planet on occasion, which is males who are getting along with each other. Because that's just when they get it in their head to now do a big organized border patrol and kill some guy from another group there. So, we're not the only ones who murder in a premeditated way, who murder in an organized manner, and more examples of this, a word laden with significance in the last 6 months or so, arguing over definitions or not. We are the only species that could be genocidal. And an example of this has been seen once again, with chimps, first seen by this primatologist John Matani, University of Michigan. This is one of those where one group of chimps were doing their border patrols and they would kill a male they would encounter from another group horrifically. And what he showed, since replicated, is over the course of months, the males in the first group systematically killed every single male in the other group. Killing those males not because of who they were, but simply because of what group they belonged to, and eradicating every single one of them and then expanding their territory. This has been seen a few times. So, not the only species that will do something genocidal, arguably so. Not the only species with all these types of violence. Are we the only species that pathologically confuses, in a small subset of us, violence with sexuality? That appears to be a human universal. We've seen circumstances where, talked about the other day, where orangutan males will take something that looks a whole lot like rape as an alternative strategy, things of that sort. It is only in humans where you get sadomasochistic sexual fantasies of arousal intermixed with pain and all that, and there's like no evidence anybody else does that. So, in lots of ways, when we are being violent, we are not being uniquely so. In lots of ways, when we humans are being good and doing things to counter violence, we are not being uniquely so either. First off, something humans are very, very good at, if it's the right humans involved, is making up. Making up after a fight, reconciling things. And Franz de Waal, primatologist at Emory, who died 2 months ago, amazing scientist, de Waal was the first one to show that we are not the only species that shows reconciliative behavior. What would this look like? Two chimps get into a fight, they tussle over something, whatever, and what de Waal would show is in the hour afterward, the two of them were now more likely than usual to groom each other, to have affiliative gestures. What is that about? They are making up. They are reconciling, and such reconciliative behavior, an increased likelihood of affiliative behaviors in the aftermath of attention, has been seen in, 30, 40 different species out there, and not just primates. This is very widespread. So, we're not the only species who could make up. And what you see is the same sort of qualifiers as with us. When you look at other primates, you don't have an equal likelihood of making up with everyone in there if you have had attention with them. It depends. It depends on what they mean to you. And we see a very similar trait to as in humans, which is like people where your relationship with them is more important to you. You're more likely to reconcile after attention. Look, this is not somebody who I want to alienate. Look, this is someone who I've been working with, whatever. The value of the person you've just had the tension with influences your motivation to reconcile afterward. And you see the same thing in other primates, work by Marina Cords at Columbia, this great study showing, okay, you got two macaque monkeys, I can't even remember anymore, and you have a circumstance, they're living in a group there, whatever, the two of them, and either the individual food acquisition versus the cooperative food acquisition scenario. Individual, like there's a string on the edge of the cage, there's a string over here, and in each one, a monkey can go over there and pull the string in, and here's a tray of food. The cooperation scenario, there's sort of a plank of wood that has food here and food there with string coming out at both ends into the cage, and if you're by yourself and you just pull your side, it's going to get diagonal and you can't pull it in. Likewise, that the only way to get the food in is for you to figure out with somebody else how to cooperate, both of you pulling at the same time. So she would show that individuals whose relationship involved individualistic food acquisition and ones who had worked out cooperating pairs. And what she saw was, after tensions, there was far more likely to be reconciliation between the pairs that learned to do this together, the pairs who have a valuable relationship with each other. And thus we see a world of difference as to who counts as being worth to make up with, and who is high up on your list, and we're not the only species with that. Other counters to tension in other species, and we already heard about the ridiculous idea that sex evolved to decrease group tensions. Sex mostly increases group tensions in social species, except bonobos, that whole issue again. Baboons, chimps, something scary happens to them, and if they all want to get along well and calm down and be nice to each other afterward, they groom each other. Bonobos, the same thing. Everybody has sex. Everybody has sex in every possible combination and permutation, so that being one of the rare cases where that is a aggression reducer, tension reducer, things of that sort. We are not the only species capable of empathy. We know that already. And Duvall pioneered these studies as well, showing, for example, you got some like poor schnook of a chimp who's sitting there and minding his own business, and there's some big high-ranking guy who's in a bad mood that day and takes it out on him, just pummels him as an innocent bystander, versus you got this low-ranking chimp who does this dumbass disinhibited thing that he goes and challenges a high-ranking male who then pummels them. In both cases, they are pummeled, but a critical difference. In the second case, the chimp, the low-ranking guy, started it. He asked for it. In the first case, he was just an innocent bystander. And what Duvall showed is, first off, chimps can differentiate in terms of studying, in terms of understanding attributions, just as they can tell the difference between a human who intentionally dumps their food on the floor outside the cage versus trips and spills it. Chimps can do the same thing here. They can tell the difference between the poor innocent bystander and the idiot kid who started the fight. And what Duvall showed was, in the aftermath of one of these altercations, the innocent bystander chimp was much more likely to be groomed in the aftermath than the jerk low-ranking chimp who started it. Not only can chimps do intentionality and that kind of cool abstract cognitive thing, they feel bad for the one who was the innocent bystander. They have empathy. They groom the individual more than they normally would. In addition, we are not the only species with a sense of justice, and Duvall pioneered this also with one of the all-time great YouTube video demonstrations of this, of what did he have? Were those capuchin monkeys? I can't remember, but showing they have a sense of justice as follows. You've got two capuchins there, and they have been trained to be part of your economic system, which is they've been trained to go get a pebble somewhere in their area, and they give it to the human, and the human in turn gives them a little piece of food. So you've got a bartering system, an economic system, and a stock marketing, all of that, and you start off with, like, you got these two capuchins there, and they both have this deal there. They know how to get a pebble, give it to the human, give them a little piece of cucumber. This one does the same thing, give them a little piece of cucumber. This is well established. Monkeys like cucumbers, don't we all? Cucumber little slices, but then you upend the entire apple cart. This capuchin comes and gives you the pebble, and you give them their slice of cucumber, and this capuchin comes and gives you a pebble, and you give the capuchin a grape or a raisin, which is a gazillion times more wonderful than some stupid little slice of cucumber or whatever. In other words, they're doing equal work and unequal pay. And what is like the funniest thing on earth in this video is you see the cucumber monkey sitting there and looks over and says, like, what the? And the other guy is getting raisins and I'm getting these little cucumber things. And you see the monkey fling the cucumber back at the human a couple of times doing that. Okay, a sense of justice, in this case, taking the form of, that's not fair, I'm getting screwed. Okay, that's like impressive, but nonetheless, like that slice of cucumber was just as calorically wonderful as it was before, but invidious, comparative, that can fuel it. Okay, so that's like cool as hell, but ultimately makes a lot of sense. What Duvall also reported was every now and then you would get the capuchin who got the grape, who would look at the other one getting the cucumber and would fling the grape back. How is that for a sense of justice? This is not, I'm getting screwed, that's not okay. It's, that guy is getting screwed, that's not okay. That is a very rare monkey, but it is one where I wish I could understand how they came to be that sort of monkey, but a sense of justice. What else? Obviously, we're not the only species that can have all sorts of cooperative stuff, reciprocally altruistic relationships that sometimes makes you a more dangerous army, but sometimes makes you more effective at protecting people from the effects of violence, from countering it. What else? Now, we're not the only species, obviously, that has something emerging along the lines of dominance hierarchy, status differences. You go look at lots of other primate species, and hierarchies are enormously important, enormously defining in their lives. In baboons, for example, you want to understand one single thing. You can only find out one thing about this individual baboon. If it's a female, you want to know if she's from a high or low-ranking dominance lineage. If it's a male, you want to know what his individual rank is, because that's totally predictive of quality of life. Dominance hierarchies found in lots of other species. So you say, do dominance hierarchies foster aggression, or do they represent a way of containing aggression? And most often, it appears to be the latter case. Okay, so you're a middle-ranking male chimp compared to a high-ranking one, and there's some great resource there. Somebody has left a really desirable dead something or other that you would all love to eat, and in the absence of a dominance hierarchy, in the absence of ritualized gestures of dominance and subordinates, in the absence of that, every single time there would have to be a bloody fight to figure out. And what dominant systems do is, by conventionalizing the conventional reminders of who's higher ranking than who, it's a way of divvying up resources unequally without having to punch it out each time. A stable dominance hierarchy suppresses aggression. And the best ways to appreciate that is to look at rare occasions in which hierarchical species, something happens, somebody critical dies or is injured, or somebody new and dominating shows up or whatever, and for a period of time, the dominance hierarchy destabilizes and aggression goes through the roof at that point. A stable dominance hierarchy lowers everybody's glucocorticoid levels. This is something I saw with my baboons. A stable dominance hierarchy is a system where you don't have to punch it out every single time. You have ritualized ways of expressing the asymmetries without things having to get bloody. Now, you look at other primate species, rhesus monkeys, for example, and there's an additional way in which dominance can be a suppressor of aggression. And this is what would be called bottom-up or egalitarian hierarchies. Typical picture, whoever's ranking is throwing his weight around and pummeling anyone who crosses him and all of that. When you get to rhesus monkeys, whoever winds up being the dominant male is dominant only because he is being supported by a large number of lower-ranking individuals. They are electing him, or they are maintaining him in office in a bottom-up way, an egalitarian way. And the most interesting thing with rhesus monkeys is this alpha male is being held in that position if and only if he has the cooperation of most of the females. If he's being a jerk to them, he will collectively drive him out of the group or refuse to back him up in a fight anymore. So a bottom-up system, everyone joining forces to support the benevolent alpha male, that kind of. So another circumstance in which a stable dominant hierarchy can wind up reducing aggression rather than triggering it. So we're now beginning to get a sense of all sorts of things we do aggressively and to counter aggression. We are not unique in it, and these are confusing issues instead. All sorts of circumstances where one might ask, does this count as aggressive or not? Here's an example. Another species of monkey called paddis monkeys. Paddis monkeys, you find them out in East Africa and the open savanna, all of that. And you go and you study paddis monkeys for 400 years, and what you'll see is males never get into a fight. Wow. What a peaceful species, a species that has managed to just completely abolish male-male aggression. Aren't they wonderful? Now, you take some paddis monkeys and put them in an enclosure, you put them in captivity, and what you see is the males kill each other. Like instantly, they fight each other like savages. Okay, wait a second. They never ever fight out in the wild, but they fight when they're in captivity. What's up with that? And it turns out that male paddis monkeys are so aggressive to each other that what they have evolved is males are widely dispersed among paddis out in the wild. They never encounter each other, and thus there's never any fights. They are scattered everywhere. They're somewhat nomadic, and put them all in a small enclosure where they can't get away from each other. That's when aggression explodes there. So you need to ask a question at this point. Is this an aggressive species? No, not at all. You look at them for years and there's no fighting. Is this an aggressive species? Enormously so. The basic organizing principle for males of their social system is keeping them from each other's throats. Complicated as to whether or not this would count as a highly aggressive species or not. How much effort goes into restraining it? Other examples, you see two male lions, and one of them leaps on the other one, and he's got his teeth bared, and he puts his mouth on the other lion's throat, rip out his jugular, and the other lion manages to knock him off and get his teeth on this guy's throat, or maybe even his crotch, and oh my God, they're being so aggressive. Is this aggression, or is this play? Is this play? Are these two male lion cubs who are wrestling with each other and pretending to bite each other's throats or private parts and all of that? And a long-standing question in the field is, what is play? What is aggressive jargon, rough and tumble play? What does it mean? What does it mean when young organisms of species after species are doing the fixed action patterns, little fragments of fixed action patterns of aggression with each other? None that are damaging, that are little parts of it, And the two different views are, this is practice. This is like learning how to string together your fixed action patterns. This is learning how to get better at them and how to jump on, oh God, what's the name of the baby Lion King? I couldn't even make a passing reference to him. Okay, so is this just practice? Is this practice getting ready for when it's going to matter in life? That being one view. The other view being, this isn't practice. This is already establishing asymmetries from very, very early in life. And what a lot of the evidence suggests is play fighting is not just play. It is already predictive of asymmetries that are going to emerge. And just think back to who was being mean to who and bullying back when you were in fourth grade kind of thing. And there's a lot of predictability there. So animal play fighting is ubiquitous all across species there. Remarkable, you see that as one of the last behaviors that stops in young animals when they are starving during a drought. It is really strongly residual, and it is not just for practice. It is already establishing asymmetries. Okay, how about another example where it's not clear if this is aggression or not? You look at this animal and they leap on some other animal, and this time they're not just playing it, they rip the throat open of this other animal. They just knock them over and they're ripping them apart and all, and this sure sounds aggressive. This sure seems like a case of violence, but no, some of the time all they're doing is getting breakfast. Oh, is hunting, is predation a form of violence? And the field just got lost for years and years back when in the 60s when people somehow thought they were interchangeable. That hunting and violence are deeply intertwined. Hunting between species and aggression within species somehow had the same biological substrates, and as a result, people wasted about a decade studying what they thought was the neurobiology of aggression when they were actually studying the neurobiology of food acquisition. And we will see something about that neurobiology. Okay, so that just sort of, presents you with the challenges of trying to recognize aggression for what it is when it comes to us, a billion times more challenging to make sense of when are we indeed being aggressive, what are the various ways in which it can happen. And as soon as you get to humans, what's one of the striking things is some of human aggression is exactly like any other species where you just get some big old heavy thing and you bop somebody over the head enough times until they're incapacitated or dead. And, a lot of human aggression is just plain physical stuff. But then we get into a much more complicated world of human aggression. We are the only species that, for example, could make sense of the following exchange. Beat me, said the masochist. No, said the sadist. What's up with that, says the meerkat, trying to make sense of that. We can take very, very weird, uniquely human manifestations of what aggression can look like, of what malevolent intent rained down on somebody else can look like. And thus, yes, human aggression could be exactly like in chimps and almost like physically mauling, but we can be aggressive by looking the other way. We can be aggressive by doing nothing more than like signing a form, terminating somebody's job. We could be aggressive the way we move a little piece of wood on a table, and we've just been a totally aggressive son of a bitch in how we play chess. We could be aggressive by passive aggression, with faint praise, with all sorts of things. And that's what we can be aggressive in ways where no other species would have a clue as to what's going on with that. Here are a couple of examples of human aggression at its most complicated. First one, this involved the daughter of a friend of mine. Some years ago, she was in like pre-K, and there was some other kid she wasn't getting along with, and this was constantly a case. It was around Easter, and they were painting Easter eggs or something, and they got into a tussle, and my friend's kid broke the other kid's Easter egg, tears, hysteria, social norm violation, all of that. And the teacher, pissed off, said, whoa, you can't do that. That was a terrible thing. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to make an Easter egg for her to show that you're sorry you did that and to replace the one you broke. So my friend's kid goes off and is in the corner, like painting an egg, and she's clearly up to something there, and all of that. And apparently, at the end, she then comes up to this other kid and says, here's your stupid Easter egg, and hands her an egg that she's painted completely black. What? Go explain that to some like territorial birds or something, what that was about. Here's your stupid Easter egg. What she was doing was showing that she was not violating the letter of the law. Ooh, an Easter egg is one where you paint it, but totally violating the spirit of the law. It's supposed to be happy, cheerful, pastel colors on it, and here's an all black egg there. And what is she saying to the other kid? I don't like you any more than I liked you, 10 minutes ago, and I'm just doing this because I'm being forced to. And the other kid showing that she understood this completely in a way that no hippo would understand. She understood this. She instantly burst into tears. Whoa, what colors you paint an Easter egg. That could be aggression. Another version of aggression, sort of the subtleties, the unlikely turns of it in humans, involved my wife. And this was many years ago, where we were driving home one day and our kids were in the back asleep in their car seats, and we're driving down the freeway. It was 101. In fact, we're driving out, and some total jerk cuts us off without any warning and almost causes an accident, and like totally irresponsible. This was not like, inadvertent on the person's part. What a total jerk. And my wife honks at the guy and he flips us off, and it's infuriating. And where are the cops when we need them? That son of a bitch, I can't believe he did that. We've got our kids in the back. We could have all been. And my wife suddenly says, I'm going to follow him. And like in the passenger seat, I say, I don't know, do you think this is a good idea? But she's often doing that, and it takes about 1.5 miles or so for the guy to suddenly clearly realize that we're trailing him. And you see he does some evasive lane switching, and my wife follows him, and he eventually gets off within the exit, and we follow him there and comes up to a traffic light where we happen to know that light lasted for a long time. It was red. So he was in front of us. There was a car in front of him. We were behind. He was boxed in. So we're sitting there, and my wife suddenly reaches over and grabs something out of the glove compartment and says, I'm going to go talk to this guy. And she leaps out of the car while I'm saying, ooh, I don't know, honey, do you think that's a good idea? And she's off and running, and I see that she gets up to the driver's side of the guy's car, and she gestures, and he rolls down the window, and she's like gesticulating at him while I'm scrambling out to try to intervene or something. I don't know what. And I see at the end she suddenly flings something at the guy, and she comes back to the car. And she sits down. Then we sort of sit silently for a while, and the light turns green, and the guy drives away at 3 miles an hour and makes a very sensible turn with a blinker on and disappears down the block. If it's possible for a car to look sheepish and how it was moving, this was it. The guy goes, so I say, okay, so what was that? What was that? What did you throw at him? And she said, I said to him, if you could do something that mean, you've not been loved enough in life. Here's a lollipop. And then flung it at the guy. And I thought this was the most wonderful bit of passive aggression. You are such a rotten, fetid, hopeless human that you could only have been brought up in moral turpitude. And here, maybe a lollipop will make you a slightly better human. You're so screwed. And oh my God, I thought this was wonderful. And obviously the guy got the message as well. Okay, so we humans could be aggressive in all sorts of unexpectedly passive-aggressive ways. We could be aggressive in extraordinary ways as well. For example, you can, for a living, get up each morning and you're living out in Nevada or whatever, and you got your job, you get into the car and you drive to work, and you got to remember to pick up the dry cleaning at the end of the day, and you get caught in traffic, and you get a little bit stressed because you may be late for work, but you get there on time. And you settle down, and what you do is you sit into this room with no windows in it, this nice air-conditioned room, and you sit down at a panel there, and what you spend the whole day doing is operating drones in the air over the other side of the planet, blowing up things and killing people. Drones where you've been tracking somebody, some supposed terrorist, for days on end with your drone that is able to show you the person in great detail. You've been watching them day after day as they go to the market, as they sit in their yard in the sun, as they play with their kids, as they enjoy dinner outside. You've got this drone up there watching them, just waiting for the day that one of their co-conspirators shows up, and then you release some hellfire missile and you take them out. And then it's the end of the day, and you pack up your stuff and you go home, and you're all excited because, like, your little girl has a dance recital that night, and you hug her afterward, and you can't believe it's possible to love someone that much. And then the next day you go back to killing people on the other side of the planet with drones. This is something you would be doing at Nevis Air Force Base in Nevada. This was where people first started doing that and showing something about just how strange this is for humans to sit there and kill someone on the other side of the planet while they're in an air-conditioned room thinking about dinner. Drone pilots have extraordinarily high incidences of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this has completely upended the whole field of thinking about it. PTSD used to be about when you and your buddies or loved ones are being threatened. There's no threat here. You're sitting there in this bunker there. There's no threat. What's the PTSD about? It's more having to do with what you are spending your time doing, watching somebody go about their life from 3,000 feet up in the air with super duper spy cameras, and watching them play with their kids and have dinner and all of that, and wait for their Confederate to show up, and then you kill them. And then what your job is to track for days afterward for their funeral, and see who shows up for the funeral and send another missile down there. So that's a version of human aggression, where you sit there and you're thinking about the mortgage bills, or don't be late for the dance festival tonight, and all of that, and oh, there he is, push a button, and someone dies on the other side of the planet. Or, how's this for the epitome of human aggression at its strangest? This was something that was described by the writer V.S. Naipaul in a book of his years ago called Travels Through Islam, and it was him visiting different countries with Muslim-majority populations, and just sort of a travelogue book and social commentary, and totally interesting. And he was eventually in Indonesia. Indonesia, in the early 1960s, there was a military coup backed by the United States that overthrew the government there and installed a strong man who ruled the place for decades afterward. And in the aftermath of the coup, every grudge, every political vendetta was carried out. Right-wing death squads went through every village, killing the intellectuals, killing the leftists, killing people who wore eyeglasses. That is a marker, and that's not the first time in history that a right-wing coup has then gone with death squads, killing people who wore glasses. Educated, that sort of thing. Before it was over with, in that first year, approximately 500,000 Indonesians were killed by these death squads. And this was many decades later. Naipaul was traveling through there, and he heard this nutty sort of thing. Someone said, you know, sometimes those death squads, when they would go to a village to kill everyone, they would bring along a traditional Indonesian gamelan orchestra. What the hell? What is that? And one day, Naipaul meets one of these veterans of these death squads, some grizzled old national hero for everything he had to do. And Naipaul interviewing him and eventually got around to saying, I heard this weird story once that sometimes you guys would, bring gamelan orchestras with you when you would go wipe out a village for the glorious nation, all of that. Is that? And the guy said, oh, yeah. Whenever we could, we would bring along a gamelan orchestra. And Naipaul said, why would you do that? And in one phrase, this man showed just how difficult the task is we have here of understanding human aggression. He looked surprised. Why did you bring a gamelan orchestra to kill every person in this village? He looked surprised and said, to make it more beautiful, of course. We are a screwed up, complicated species in that regard. We are a complicated species in the ways in which we go about countering aggression. Yes, bonobos have sex, other primates groom each other, other primates will defend individuals in a fight, things of that sort, but we can go about being good and being protective and countering violence in amazingly unique ways. For one thing, right off the bat, is we've got the same capacity for abstracting over space and time if we are capable of sitting here in a bunker and pressing a button and killing somebody on the other side of the planet. We are capable of sitting here and clicking on a site and donating money to a charity, being kind to someone whose face we will never see, that as a profoundly human rim. We can do that. We can do all sorts of interesting things for decreasing aggression, and we could distinguish between what would be called reconciliation and forgiveness. Reconciliation. We are pretty good at this, as are lots of other primates, and this is something very different from forgiveness. And the best way to appreciate this is after South Africa got its independence, it established the first Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Mandela and his folks had the very wise insight that, in the aftermath of this, there was this danger that, South Africa was going to erupt into a civil war. All these Afrikaan militias were still threatening to try to upend this peaceful transition of power to black rule. And, there were all of these perpetrators of apartheid violence who needed to be brought to justice. And they invented the concept of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. People who were about to be jailed for their appalling violent acts during apartheid could apply instead for a TRC hearing, and about 10% of these people were accepted. And what you would do is appear before a panel of judges, clergy, psychologists, family members of the victims you had done unspeakable things to. And what was very clear there was you did not have to apologize. You did not have to express remorse. You did not have to beg for forgiveness. And everybody elsewhere in the world saying, oh, these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, these are so heartwarming. The person comes in there and apologizes, and the widow of the person he's savaged, they both burst into tears and hug each other at the end. That never happened. This was a very different type of peacekeeping. All the person had to do was tell exactly everything they had done in detail, even the things they had done secretly that nobody knew about. Oh, this is the person who committed that murder. They had to tell everything so that forever after, no family member or victim would be left there wondering what happened, where they disappeared, where are their bones. And the other thing the person had to do was convincingly say, and I'm not going to do anything like that again. I'm not going to join a militia. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. Here's what I did, and I'm not going to do it again. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'm begging for forgiveness. And what you had as well, one of the amazing things about Mandela is that African National Congress fighters his side, people there who committed war crimes also came before Truth and Reconciliation commissions, like equal capacity for figuring out how to get along. And since then, there have been TRCs in the Balkans after the Balkan Wars in the 1990s, in South America after various juntas have been overthrown and trying to figure out what the murderers for them had been doing and where the bodies were buried and all of that. And all of them the same thing. At first pass, you're so disappointed because you're expecting all these heartwarming scenes of murderers and the victims hugging each other, and no, all they're doing is, this is the ultimate pragmatism, ultimate realpolitik. This is a country that is a mess, a broken mess after whatever war of independence, civil war, insurrection, whatever, and all they need to do now is to start rebuilding. And all they need to do is, we're not going to send you to jail if you tell us what you did and you can convince us that you're not going to go join a militia or you're not going to join a mob that's going to burn somebody to death when accused of having been, that you're going to just lay low. And with the people who went before the TRC, about 90% of them would then be, rather than jailed, sent home. And it works spectacularly as long as you recognize this was not about love and forgiveness and remorse. This was just about the pragmatism of two chimps being more likely to groom each other after a fight. You got to get along. We have a cooperative relationship here, or we have a functional country to build at this point. So, we make strict distinctions between reconciliation and forgiveness. We also do something very strange with forgiveness. It is not clear if reconciling chimps feel forgiveness as well. Who knows? But we do forgiveness in a very interesting way in that it is often a selfish act. It is often described by people, victims of horrendous something or others, as liberating for them. To forgive the person, to finally not have to be consumed by that. And this could be appreciated in two ways. One is this amazing quote back when from Booker T. Washington, who said, "I will let no man soil my soul by causing me to hate him." And in that context, forgiveness is not for the perpetrator. Forgiveness is for yourself. As a second piece of insight about that is one of the seminal findings in the field of psychoneuroimmunology. Forgiveness is generally stimulating of the immune system of the forgiver. It is an act for yourself rather than for them. Then you can get extraordinary displays of human peacemaking by doing paradoxical things. St. Patrick, Patricius, whatever, Roman in Roman England, kidnapped by wild-ass Irish tribe pirates when he was a teenager, kidnapped and kept as a slave there for 6 years as a shepherd, escaped, got back to England, realized he kind of missed all that, like, Irish, bigger-than-life vim and vigor, and decided to go back to Ireland, and he was going to convert all of them to Christianity, this island full of warring clans. And what did he do? He had no weapons. He had no arms. And famously what he did was just walk all over Ireland. No evidence he did anything about the snakes, but he was so boldly communicating, "I am not willing to carry a weapon," that people were impressed as hell by him. And not only wasn't he killed, but people converted left and right to Christianity. Whoa! The refusal to carry a weapon as a weapon against violence. Extraordinary. And this paves the way for, in some ways, the most remarkable thing humans do when it comes to containing violence or what we do in the face of human awfulness. And it has to do with something, formally stating it in terms of logic. The more X cannot be the case, the more you have to work to make X the case. What do I mean by this? This is summarized a little bit less abstractly. This great quote by Kierkegaard saying, being a good Christian, and this could be generalized far beyond that, but being a good Christian consists of being able to maintain two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time. Let's make this more explicit. And this is this remarkable quote from this woman, Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun who has spent her entire career down in Louisiana ministering to the spiritual needs of men on death row in Angola prison in Louisiana, which is apparently like one of the worst places on earth to wind up. And what she does is these guys on death row, and she's the one who's there when they die and hold their hand and whatever. And over and over and over throughout her career, people would come up to her and say, "Oh my God, I hear what you do. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing that for the victims? Don't you care about the victims?" And she would always have the same statement, an extraordinary statement, which is, the less forgivable the act, the more you need to forgive it. The less lovable the person, the more you need to find the means to love them. There is nothing in the world of other primates reconciling after a fight that holds a candle to this. Okay, so this gives us our sense of what the behaviors involved, and the theme there over and over is exactly what you think aggression looks like and peacekeeping looks like. It doesn't always look like that, and you're not the only species, and it could be incredibly subtle. We transition now to what's going on in the brain 1 second before. And in the few minutes we have left, let me start off with a completely shocking finding in the field. It's got something to do with the limbic system. Yeah, same thing again, back to the 1930s, that Kluver-Bucy syndrome, where Kluver and Bucy wiped out large parts of limbic systems of monkeys. And last week's observation on their part, you got all sorts of inappropriate sexual behavior. This week's observation, you got all sorts of inappropriate aggressive behavior. And much as with the sexual behavioral abnormalities, this was starting people thinking about, you know that rhinencephalon, those other neuroscientists are always going on about, it may not be about odor all that much. This may not just be the nose brain. It seems to have something to do with emotions. And you better bet the places we're about to leap into on Wednesday is the amygdala and the frontal cortex in terms of constraining aggression, pulling off disciplined aggression, the anterior cingulate, and empathy, the insular cortex, and disgust in some other areas as well. This is where we will pick up looking at the neuroanatomy of, humans being awful to each other and humans trying to counter that.